Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast. Today I want to talk about high functioning depression and why I have some issues with the use of that phrase, that term. It's not that it shouldn't be used. I mean, who am I to tell anybody what to describe something as? It may have utility, it could be useful in certain situations, and the fact that we're talking by using that phrase about mental health, I think, is a good thing, of course. However, I also think it's important to understand what we mean when we use that term and also what we don't mean. By the way, if you happen to catch yesterday's live stream, you'll be aware it was full of technical glitches. And so I thought what I do today is re-record that and post this episode today rather than attempt to do it live again until I get those glitches sorted out. So to begin, I thought it might be useful to look at a couple of articles and a couple of slides that I've created as well. So you'll see there that I've said, is it actually a thing, high functioning depression? I'm going to say that it is, but I don't think it is as described. I think it's misleading, which I hope will make sense as we go along. So from this article, what's high functioning depression? It's a non-medical term that refers to having symptoms of depression but being able to carry out routine tasks with little issue. Now, what I'm going to say there is that describes a lot of people with depression not being called high functioning depression. And as it says, the term was popped up on treatment center, ER, websites with health blogs to describe people who are seemingly managing their depression without major problems. Again, that can describe an awful lot of people, nothing necessarily to do with a so-called high-functioning depression. Then there's no way to clinically test for high-functioning depression since it's not a medical diagnosis. So that's interesting, isn't it? We're using the term, we're using the phrase, but it's not something that can be categorized through a diagnosis. So why use it? As I've said already, the fact we're using a term that mentions depression is good because we're talking about mental health, but it is also not actually a thing that can be diagnosed. And you see here it says, but providers can screen for depression in general and recommend treatments. So that's good. But the screening for depression, not high functioning depression. So once more, question mark over the use of that phrase. And then from this article, what is it? Signs, symptoms. So people with high functioning depression may not seem depressed on the outside, but the condition can cause turmoil on the inside. And I would suggest that's, again, the same for a lot of people who are experiencing depression. And it's not called high functioning depression. Now, this, again, following on in this same article, is not describing high functioning depression. It's describing in many ways what it isn't. So that can't get out of bed feeling, that overwhelming cloud of hopelessness that never lets up, that hard to shake belief that the world would be better off without you. Often people with depression can't always keep up with the demands of day-to-day life, like holding a steady job, having meaningful friendships and relationships, or keeping their house organized. What is E? Or a Z, I should say. The depression can make every chore a Herculean effort and things start to slide. And if you've been there, you'll recognize that. I know people who've been there, who are there. And this is obviously challenging to say the least, but that is not what people seem to be calling high functioning depression. Not at all. And then we get on to what it is based on this article. But that's not always the case. Some people can experience depression in a way that doesn't appear debilitating from the outside, but still causes them a wave of turmoil inside. Absolutely, as I've said before, like depression. Depression isn't always something you can see in others or pinpoint easily in yourself, says psychologist Dawn Potter. For some, depression lives under the surface. It can be extremely challenging to go about your day-to-day business, I would add in there, but to the rest of the world, you seem to be doing reasonably well. Again, describing people with depression, some people with depression, not necessarily anything at all to do with so-called high-functioning depression. Some people refer to that as high-functioning depression, as in you're living with depression but still keeping up with the demands of life. And again, the risk of being repetitive, that describes people with depression. A lot of people with depression, not everyone, of course. So, what I thought I'd do, this is an addition to yesterday's live stream. Didn't have this there, but on reflection, I thought this might be useful. I've just summarized things from the DSM-5 and given you a list of types of depression, because I think it's important to recognize if we're going to bandy the phrase around high functioning depression and it isn't something that can be diagnosed, then we really should understand a little bit more, or be aware of at least, the types of depression that are out there, again, according to this particular diagnostic manual. So MDD, major depressive disorder. And we've got things like two weeks and above of depressed mood, stroke, loss of interest, 5 and above symptoms. For example, sleep, appetite changes, fatigue. We'll look at that in more detail. And here we have persistent depressive disorder, chronic low mood, 2+ years, 1+ years in children who have milder symptoms. PDD we'll look at in more detail. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder, severe mood symptoms and luteal phase, that's the second part, they resolve post-menstruation. This is a lot more severe than post-menstrual syndrome. And then other types of depression, substance medication induced. Drugs, alcohol, for example, due to a medical condition, hypothyroidism, for example, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, again in children, irritability, outbursts, other unspecified depressive disorder, symptoms not fitting specific criteria, e.g. short episodes. Note, also, when defining depression, we've got to rule out things like bipolar disorder and other causes. Now, important to say here, this is not me giving a diagnosis. This is not, should not be considered to be something that is in lieu of speaking to a professional. I always say that. Reach out, speak to friends, of course, and friends should speak to others if they think someone is struggling in some sort of way. But where and if at all possible, professional help is required. That's also one of the challenges I've got when we bandy the high-functioning depression, that phrase around. Fine, have you spoken to a professional? Because if you did, they probably wouldn't have called it that, but that's fine if you're using it, as long as we seek that help. Anyway, let's continue. So what is major depressive disorder? A persistent low mood or loss of interest impacting function. Now, remember, high functioning depression. So we're talking here in the DSM about function. 5+ of 9 symptoms for 2 weeks or more. Low mood, anhedonia, so that's that lack of joy and enjoyment of things that we normally would enjoy. Sleep, appetite changes, fatigue, worthlessness, poor focus, and those kind of thoughts. Significant distress or impairment, not due to substances or other conditions. And again, here, DSM's US in origin, so we've got 7% of US runabout adults yearly. Risks of that and reduced quality of life. Again, I'm not using a particular word because of the algorithms. And then we've got MDD, severity and functionality. So we've got severity levels, and you will see that these are to do with functionality. Again, remember, high functioning depression. So we have function mentioned here. Mild, 5 symptoms, minimal impairment, e.g. works, but with effort. They can work. They can go to work. Doesn't that sound a little bit like high functioning depression? So here it would be mild, but still there's an impact. Still, one would hope this individual has access to help. Moderate, more symptoms, more impairment. E.g. they might miss work or there are strained relationships. Again, these are just examples. And then we have severe, more symptoms, major impairment, can't work, neglect self-care, may include psychosis, and functionality. So overall, we're looking at what functionality is retained and what functionality is reduced. So things like work is impacted, relationships are impacted, the ability to care for self is impacted, and that can guide treatment. So functionality being important. But note here, mild. Doesn't that sound familiar? And then to put this together, just very, very, very basic. We're looking at number of symptoms and functional impairment. And so you can see that we have mild, we have moderate, and we have severe, and more symptoms and also more impairment of functionality. So if you were going to put so-called high functioning depression somewhere probably kind of there. I'm not saying we should, by the way, at all. I'm just saying this stuff has been looked at. This is in a diagnostic manual, not that graph, by the way. And so it's important to recognize, to anchor ourselves to the work that's being done already and being done as updates come along. And also recognize that, yes, that phrase, high functioning depression, may have its place, but we do have things which pin things down more accurately and more consistently. And there's less woolliness about this than there is about that phrase, high functioning depression. And then I wanted to put this here, just to sort of give a hint at how complex potentially and how subtle potentially, how much work has been done definitely in the area of understanding and helping people with depression. So specifiers in the diagnostic manual are additional descriptors to characterize a presentation of MDD, providing details about symptoms, course of, the trajectory or associated features beyond severity. They help clinicians tailor diagnosis and treatment. So these could include these additional descriptors, remember, anxious distress, mixed features like manic, hypomanic, elevated mood, racing thoughts, melancholic features, again, anhedonia, lack of mood, reactivity, profound despair, and more. Atypical features, mood reactivity, psychotic features, delusions, hallucinations, catatonia, motor abnormalities, seasonal pattern, peripartum onset. And the purpose of these is, again, to enhance diagnostic precision and also to guide treatment. And this additionally reflects the heterogeneity of MDD. It's important. So what we have is in a move, the thrust towards being able to categorize so we can diagnose, the ability to also say that some things don't fit exactly in this particular box. And so we have these other specifiers to help tailor and also to help capture what may be going on. And I think that's really useful. So back to the article that we left off from. Major depression versus high functioning depression. So the difference between the two is that it's common for people with major depression to have trouble taking care of themselves in life that needs their attention. It's common, but not always the case, as we've just seen, because mild might be a bit of a struggle, but what does that mean? It's going to be different for different people. But high functioning depression describes people who may live with similar feelings as people with major depression while managing to keep up with their responsibilities. And so let's look at that again. It's common for people with major depression to have trouble taking care of things that in life that need attention, but high functioning may live with similar feelings of people with major depression while managing to keep up with their responsibilities. But again, I've got to challenge that and say, but you can have major depression and still be keeping up with things. Anyway, then I want to look here. Persistent depressive disorder, or as I used to call it, dysthymia. And I mentioned this already. So persistent depressive disorder, known as dysthymia or low-grade depression, is less severe than major depression, but often more chronic. In other words, it's less acute, but it goes on for a while, a long time. It occurs twice as often in women as in men, according to this article. Persistent depressive disorder, PDD, is a serious and disabling disorder that shares many symptoms with other forms of clinical depression. It is generally experienced as a less severe but more chronic form of major depression. PDD was referred to as dysthymia in previous versions of the DSM. It's characterized by a depressed mood, experienced most of the time for at least 2 years. In children and adolescents, mood can be irritable rather than depressed. In addition to depression or irritable mood, at least 2 of the following must be present: insomnia, excessive sleep, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor appetite or overeating, poor concentration or indecisiveness, and feelings of hopelessness. More severe symptoms marking major depression are often absent in PDD. This includes anhedonia, again the inability to feel pleasure, psychomotor symptoms, particularly lethargy or agitation, and thoughts of those things there. Now, when we look at this, then we can see that in addition to the depressed state, then we need 2 of these for it to be PDD: insomnia or excessive sleep. I think I've had both. Low energy or fatigue. I think I've had that. Low self-esteem. Definitely that. Poor appetite or overeating. Yeah, both. Poor concentration, indecisiveness. Yes, definitely. Feelings of hopelessness. Definitely. And so when we look at PDD and the fact that it goes on and is chronic, I would also suggest that this could be what some people are calling high functioning depression in some individuals, with some individuals. So hopefully beginning to see how using that phrase and that term was useful in one way, because we're saying, hey, we need to talk about this stuff, could be masking, could be just covering up what actually is a diagnosis that could, with the individual being diagnosed, could be treated. These people could be helped. One of the other issues that I have, somebody might be experiencing a low mood. Life can cause us to have low moods, of course, for elongated periods of time. And we don't necessarily say, well, it's depression. And perhaps we shouldn't, because what is happiness after all? That's fleeting. I don't think it's swinging from the chandelier. Life can be full of challenges. And so should we be saying that's depression? No, we should speak to a professional. We should figure out what is going on. Also, if we have that low mood and it goes on for some time, then maybe it is mild, or maybe it is PDD. This long-term chronic condition. But we don't know that unless we speak to someone. And hopefully you can see why I'm saying that this phrase, this term, high functioning depression, can mask. And it could mean that some people refer to themselves as that and just go about their business, and it's just something they say. Or it could mean that they need to speak to someone, because what it is PDD. Or it could be that it is MDD mild. Anyway, symptoms, again, of PDD. Persistent depressive disorder, low, dark or sad mood that occurs for most of the day, for more days than not, for at least 2 years. And again, this would rule out seasonally affective. People with PDD often describe their mood as consistently sad or down in the dumps. And again, you may have described yourself like that. I certainly have. It's not PDD, hasn't gone on for long enough. Doesn't go on for long enough, because I have those moments that I would call happiness and a sense of well-being. So this is an absence, or pretty much an absence of that. And so if someone's saying, well, hey, it's high functioning depression as like a descriptor because they want to use it, maybe they're missing out something there, as I've said before. So let's get on to this then. Why I have a problem with the term high functioning depression. It could be thought of as a marker of productivity, and that is reductive. What do I mean by that? Well, say high functioning. So the implication is that we're going about things, we're working, we're making deadlines, we're hitting targets. We are effectively saying, yeah, I'm going about my life, and I'm low and I'm down, and I don't have those high points like I used to, and the joy has gone out of things that I used to be joyful about. But I'm high functioning. And I think the focus being on functioning is almost commercializing it potentially. And maybe you think, well, that's a bit much. It probably is a bit much in a lot of situations. But again, I'm highlighting where I think this could be misconstrued and misused. So if you think about, well, I'm functioning, but I'm down. Well, let's just focus on how you're feeling rather than the fact that you're functioning. Because as we've seen scattered throughout some of the articles that we've looked at so far, people on the outside can seem fine. But what about the inside? So I just worry that we're focusing on the word functioning, the ability to do things, and that some people could say to themselves, well, yeah, I'm being productive. Great, but how are you feeling? What's going on? Can we help you with that? Then we don't need a hierarchy. For example, I can be productive versus I'm not productive. There could be, with some of the uses of this phrase, and I'm not saying all the time, of course, but there could be the sense of, well, hey, I'm high functioning. It is almost like a badge of honor. I'm really low, but I'm productive. And the hierarchy, well, you're not productive. You can't get out of bed, but I can. Once more, not saying that's what people are saying, but I'm saying that the use of this, the common use of that phrase, if it becomes too common, it reduces what it actually is. It reduces the impact of it. We need to constantly be aware of mental health ourselves and others, and we need to constantly be aware of terms and phrases that get bandied about to such an extent that they lose their power and lose their meaning. And I think high functioning depression is one of those phrases that could lose its power potentially, if it has any power. And I believe it has utility in certain situations because people will talk about how they're feeling. Great. Let's not leave it there. Let's explore. Tell me more. And also, when we consider another word that's quite common these days, ADHD. So, how many people talk about that? And is there a danger that we miss out how utterly debilitating that can be for a lot of people, because it becomes like a common it's in the common currency of day-to-day conversation for a lot of people. It can reduce its impact. And once more, one of those things that is out there, that phrase, that term, and that people use, but they don't mean it that way. They don't mean it clinically. They're just saying, oh, well, I did this and I did that and it's ADHD. Is it? Because if you've had it, you have it. And if you know people who've had it, have it, then, because it tends to be long term, it tends to be with us forever, pretty much. Doesn't mean to say that things can't be helped, but the point I'm getting to is that can be so debilitating. So just like depression, there are different ways that people experience it. And once more, if we use that phrase as common currency, it can mask, it can obfuscate what is going on. And sometimes it can cause people even to say to themselves, yeah. I do find these things challenging, but everybody's talking about it, so I won't go and get help. I won't go and get a diagnosis. Very important. I come back to speak to professionals. If in doubt, speak to a professional, at least speak to friends and figure out what is going on with you, because it could well be that you need the help and you need the strategies to function as well as you can in life to navigate through it. So it's just another example of where we can reduce the impact and the importance of what is going on in terms of mental health because we overuse the term. Anyway, we have better descriptors. Oh, by the way, I said high functioning versus mid-level functioning versus barely functioning. Again, just to emphasize this hierarchy that I don't like the sounds of, because everyone's experience is their experience, and no one in that sense can be compared to someone else. It's like when people say it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, then we can look at them and say, really? Well, I've had this, and this happen, so that's hardly the worst thing. No. If it is the worst thing for them, then it is the worst thing for them. So someone in the middle of something that is dragging them down, it doesn't really matter to them in many ways where that lies in terms of moderate or mild or whatever. It's their experience. It's important that they talk about it and they get help. So we shouldn't think about it in those terms of a potential hierarchy or comparing. Yes, of course, we can always look at someone and say, wow, I should be grateful for my life. Absolutely. I think that's a different thing. The issue here and the challenge and the traps here are that we get into comparing and forget about the fact that this is impacting us, or it's impacting our friend or family member, and we need to help them. We need to get help for them if possible. And we have better descriptors. Now, there we are there. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the diagnostic and statistical manual, then yes, indeed, there are more nuanced, subtle, technically proficient, well-researched ways of describing different types of depression. And I come back then full circle to say I'm not suggesting don't use that phrase. Of course not. If people are talking about mental health, great, as I've said already. But what I am saying, use it if you so desire, of course, but be aware that there's a whole other set of language around mental health, and in this case, depression, that could well be worth being at least aware of. And to, as I've said before, if you are in some way finding things difficult, whatever it may be in terms of mental health, then talk to someone, reach out, find, if possible, professional help. And also, I believe it's incumbent on each and every one of us to continue to dialogue with those people around us, colleagues, family members, friends, wherever, whenever that may be, and ask how they're doing, particularly if we think something is going on. Trust your intuition. And if you haven't seen someone for a while, or they've gone quiet, pay them a visit, see how they're doing. Anyway, I hope that makes sense, and I'm interested to know what you think about all that stuff. For the moment, from me, bye for now.